lucky hell, welcome back to my channel. I want to say thank you to everyone who watched my last video about white privilege. Let's just get this straight. White privilege doesn't exist. It's not a thing. It's basically racist against white people, and you can only have white privilege if you're fucking like rich and living a dope life, right? Wrong. Because it was a really scary video for me to put out simply because it's such an important subject, and one, I didn't want to fuck it up, and two, I kind of was expecting a lot of negative feedback from people who didn't agree with me, and I was very happily surprised that 90% of the people who responded to the video responded in a way that, yeah, we get it, we understand, this is an important issue. There was very few comments of people saying ignorant things. Now that we know, hopefully, that it does, I wanted to do a follow-up video for a couple of reasons, mainly because while I said in the first video that we don't need to be ashamed or apologize or feel guilty for being white, but what we do need to do is acknowledge and be compassionate with the fact that we do have white privilege. And while being compassionate is really, really important, compassion needs to go with action. We've also got to be active in helping break down those social structures that keep some people oppressed or have some people treated differently to others. Because it's not really enough to just not be a racist piece of shit, you know, like, wow, you're not racist. Awesome, but what are you actually doing to break down those issues that other people have to deal with? But before I get into that, I just wanted to give like one more small example, because I did see some people commenting saying that they didn't believe white privilege existed because they had suffered some kind of crime at someone who was not white, like a person of color. Like, there was a couple of people that commented like, oh yeah, well, what about this? I had this situation and these people of color like robbed me or beat these people up and they didn't go to jail. Okay, so yeah, everyone can commit crime. Everyone can get away with crime. You might feel that the judge in that case was biased, helping the people of color. It happens. Like, it's not a perfect world at all. Not everyone who is guilty of something gets the justice they deserve. Sometimes bias swings both ways. Like, it's totally possible that someone within the law enforcement or judicial system could be biased in a way that in fact doesn't punish someone because they are a person of color. Like, it's possible, you know, there are all kinds of things going to play there, but we're not going to go into that. All I want to do is give a little example of white privilege, because although people of color can commit crime, can be criminals, that does not mean that there is not white privilege. You can be white and you can suffer crime at the hands of someone who's not white. That does not take away your white privilege. You still have white privilege. I'm going to explain it to you, I hope. So I want you to think of it in this small yet significant way. In our modern culture, we have TV and movies and advertising, and that is a really, really, really integral, strong part of our culture. And what we see on the TV and in magazines and in advertisements is a reflection of culture and a reflection of what is okay and what is acceptable in culture. And we see this with like beautiful, thin looking people. We're taught to believe that beautiful and thin looking people is normal and is acceptable, and that's what we should be. Let's look back even just a couple of decades ago. TV and movies and advertising was predominantly a white party. Like, there was only ever white people, and the only time you would see people of color was when they'd be the bad guys or the evil guy or the robber or the rapist, or, you know, that's what it was. I remember watching a couple of months ago, I bought a bunch of Sex and the City seasons because my internet had stopped working, and I was like, I'm gonna die, I need some kind of fulfillment visually. And as I was watching it, I realized, like, holy shit, there's like no black people on this TV show, like at all. I think the first black person came in on like season 3. Back when Sex and the City first came out, I didn't notice this at all. I just was like, yeah, Sex and the City, I love this show, this is so fun. I did not pick up on it whatsoever because it came out, I don't even know what year it came out. When did Sex and the City come out? Anyway, it came out a while ago, and back then it was pretty much like black people were bad guys in TV shows and black guys were the murderers in movies, you know. That was what it was. And now in 2015-16, I was watching these DVDs and I was like, holy crap, that's not okay. If I was black, if I was a black woman and I was watching Sex and the City, I wouldn't watch Sex and the City because like I'm not represented in that show at all. There's literally nothing to do with me. This is not for me. This is not my world. Like fun, sexy women is not black women. That's what I was thinking when I was watching Sex and the City. Like that's crazy, you know? This little tiny thing is a form of white privilege. This is the privilege that white people have. White people see themselves reflected in TV and news and advertising. White people see themselves represented in all kinds of mainstream media telling us that we are okay. And for people who are not white, they don't really see themselves as well. Of course, nowadays we see a lot more. There are TV shows with all different kinds of ethnicities. There are TV shows with only black people, with only Asian people. There's TV shows that are super multicultural, and that is awesome because that is a true reflection of our society. But even now when we cast someone like Annie as a black actress, there's throwback even now. So even though we have all these multicultural kinds of media coming at us, there's still some ways to go. And this is still an issue with Asian actors. Asian actors are still generally portrayed as the kung fu bad guys or the delivery boys in TV shows and movies. And this is another form of white privilege rearing its ugly head against different kinds of people. So this is shit we have to break down and really acknowledge and really stop fighting whether it exists, because just because you may have seen someone of color get away with something in your opinion doesn't mean that you still don't have a certain kind of privilege. And it doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make your life easy. That was what I was trying to explain in the last video. And if you don't get it, if you really feel opposition to what I'm saying, I think it would be really important for you to look internally, speak to different kinds of people, and figure out why you are so aggressively against admitting that you have things a little bit easier than others. Just a thought. So now I want to talk quickly about what kind of little actions we can all have to help exercise our white privilege in a good way and start breaking down these social divisions that are really doing much more harm and really no good at all. Yes, just harm. It's just shit, actually. There are two things that I have thought of recently that are really easy, really simple things that we can all do. One of them is checking your microaggressions. Now, a microaggression is a tiny little, almost subconscious behavior that you will practice that is actually kind of an aggressive behavior, but in a really small way, hence the term microaggression. As an example, a microaggression might be you see a black person on the metro, and instead of just sitting next to them, you kind of avoid sitting next to them and you stand. Doesn't really seem like a big deal. Maybe you don't even notice it, but this is called a microaggression because you're choosing not to sit next to someone based on what they look like. Checking yourself to see whether you avoid certain people is a really good way to check if you have some of these microaggressions which are caused by racial bias and social bias. I'll give you a little example in the term of a little story time. A couple of months ago, a friend of mine was visiting Paris and they got in really late. It was like 8 p.m. on a Sunday evening when they arrived to my house, and they were really exhausted and they were like, "Lucky, do you have any tobacco?" And I said, "No, I don't smoke cigarettes." They were like, "Oh, I'm so tired, but I really want to get some tobacco." So I was like, "Don't worry, listen, I'm gonna go out. I'm gonna go to a bodega. I'm sure there'll be one open. They always sell tobacco." So I went outside, I went down my street, and I noticed that the little bodega on the end of my street was actually closed, and like that's the only thing that's always open here. I was thinking like, fuck, Paris, everything is always closed. And I saw a guy just about to go into his house, and I said to him, "Oh, pardon monsieur, excuse me, could you tell me where there's like a little store open? I really need to buy some cigarettes or tobacco." And he made a big effort walking me to the end of the street. He spent like a few minutes thinking, and then he was like, "Oh yeah, I think if you go down there's like a bar that has a tobacco in there, like you should be able to do that." And he was so helpful, and yeah, it was just like a really cool interaction. And then as I was walking to get the tobacco, I realized like, oh, that guy was Arabic. I reckon some people would have chosen not to ask him just based on the fact that he was like an Arabic guy. I don't even know why this popped into my head, but I was just like, huh, because I didn't even think what he looked like. I probably wouldn't ask just some random guy who was like skulking on the streets alone, because you know, I'm quite cautious about talking to random men at night. But he was on his way like into his house and he was focused on that. He wasn't even looking at me, so I was totally feeling comfortable to ask him if he knew of a place. And it didn't even pop into my mind what ethnicity he was, because it just doesn't, stuff like that doesn't really, I mean, I notice it, but it doesn't make my decision on whether I'll talk to someone. And that's when I was thinking like, oh, but for some other people that would make their decision on whether they talk to them. So this is a very small example of how you can kind of check your own microaggressions. If you're about to ask someone for help and then you think, oh, it's a black guy, check yourself. Check that. If you avoid someone based on the color of their skin, that's a microaggression. If you choose not to sit next to someone on the metro based on the color of their skin, that's a microaggression. It doesn't make you a bad person. These things are often built into us from a young age by society and our environment, and sometimes even our family. It's okay. It's totally okay to recognize it and make the conscious decision to go and sit next to that person, to go and ask that person for directions, have an interaction, smile, have a moment with them. You can choose to do that, and that is a tiny, tiny way that you can be a part of positive action rather than just passive compassion. Another really simple and easy thing you can do, but maybe a little bit more challenging, is calling out shit. If you see something happening to someone and you believe it's based on the color of their skin, you can stand up and say, hey, why are you speaking to them like that? Why are you double checking their ID? Why aren't you letting them come into this restaurant? Things like this. I saw a video on Facebook yesterday where there was a black woman talking about her stepsister who is half black and half white, but she really looks super Caucasian, and they were both in a supermarket together and they were writing a check to pay for all their groceries, and her sister-in-law or sister-in-law wrote her check, and the cashier, who was a white woman, took the check no problem. And when this woman went to the cashier, the mood changed a little bit, and when she wrote a check for her groceries, the cashier demanded 2 forms of ID and started checking in the book for people who've written bad checks. And the stepsister used her white looking privilege, and stepped up and said something. She said to the cashier, why are you doing this? Why are you asking her for 2 forms of ID when you just accepted my check? And the cashier said something like, oh, well, you've been here before, I know, I've seen you. And the stepsister said, actually, I've only lived here for a few months. This woman has lived here for like 6 years or something, or it was something like that. And she stepped up and used her white privilege and her position as a white looking woman to call out this blatant racial bias. This is the kind of thing that you can do. If you see someone being served and then you are served and someone else isn't served and they're a person of color, question it. And it might be awkward, it might cause a little bit of a scene. Well, you know what? It's awkward and it causes a scene for that person of color who's being treated differently to how you are. It feels really awkward to them. They are feeling like everyone is staring at them and everyone is judging them. So if you're gonna feel like a little awkward and a little like, oh my God, everyone's looking at me for a few minutes, I think that's a small price to pay for standing up for someone else who, if they were to stand up for themselves, they get labeled angry and aggressive far more quickly than we do. In the same way that anytime a woman stands up for herself, she gets labeled a feminazi. Whereas if a man stands up to another man and says, hey, check your behavior, that was really misogynistic, that's really effective. That's being an ally, that's being a comrade, that's being someone who is stepping up to the plate and not just being like, hey, I'm not racist, but actually being like, I'm not racist and I'm not gonna stand for that shit. So that's something small you can do. And sometimes these are gonna be really hard situations to call out. If you hear someone saying some ignorant racist shit, call them out on it. Say, that's not okay. Call them out on their stuff. This is a way that you can stand up and check people for their behavior and make it known that this is not okay for you. This is not okay in general, and don't let people get away with it. This can be really difficult because a lot of people have folks in their family who are biased or racist or a little insensitive, and it can be really, really awkward to have these conversations. I've had these conversations amongst people before, and it's been a whole like awkward silence for a few seconds, but I think that's a small price to pay for stepping up and checking someone when they're saying some kind of whack shit in front of you, and you're just like, hang on a minute, let's check what we're saying here. Let's check the reasoning behind what we're saying. I just wanted to do a little follow-up. I wanted to give my little TV example because holy crap, this is a privilege that I have. I can watch almost any TV show, especially from like a couple of decades ago, and I see myself represented. You know, if you go back even further, I don't see myself represented because women were not really represented equally on TV. There's levels to this shit. And I mean, this kind of stuff, there's so much more that we can do. I definitely will be making more videos on this subject. I'd love to hear your suggestions of what you think we should discuss, because I think this is a really healthy discussion for all of us to have. I'm really, really inspired by all of you guys, all the comments that you've left. I'm sorry if I haven't responded to you personally. My YouTube has been going so fast. I've got so many new comments and new subscribers that it's a little bit hard to keep up with them all. I want you to know I read each and every single comment that you guys leave. Thank you so much. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. Let me know what you think we should talk about next. What else can we do to break down this white privilege? I can't wait to hear from you guys. Please give me a thumbs up if you like the video. It really helps me. And if you haven't done so already, hit the little, I think it's on that end, I can't remember what side it's on, but hit the little picture of me, it's subscribe, or click that red button, subscribe. New videos every week. Mwah! Big love to you guys. Thanks for watching.